But we're very excited. One of the themes at the School of Public Policy is to really pull everything back to the actual policies and the people who are implementing the policies. So we're very excited to have our final panel of the day be one that brings together some county registrars from here in Southern California and a moderator who has joined us all the way from Kansas. So Monica Childers-Crane is the Director of Government Services for Democracy Works, and she is a proud Jayhawk and sort of jumped into public service through her experience at the University of Kansas's Dole Institute of Politics. She's worked with the Massachusetts State House and then has also worked in new media, first on campaigns and then eventually for NGPVAN. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to start this final panel of our conference.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for having us all. And I'm going to just introduce you to our panelists. We have an incredibly distinguished panel here. 3 of your wonderful registrars of voters in California who are also national leaders as far as election innovation in election administration technology. To my left is Dean Logan, the Registrar-Recorder and County Clerk for Los Angeles County, which is the largest by population voting district in the country, and also has a lot of geography along with that too. To his left is Neal Kelley, who is the Registrar for Orange County, who also has a ton of voters, but in a very small area, much smaller. And then to his left is Kammy Foote, who is from Inyo County, California, and she has a much smaller jurisdiction, but is also one of these wonderful inspirations in leading technology in the election space. And she does it a little differently because she has a very different jurisdiction. So you all have presentations about some of the tech that you are employing in your offices and working on. So I'd love it if you would kick us off there, Dean.
Great. Well, thank you for having us. I want to thank the Davenport Institute and Pete Peterson, who we have the pleasure of working with here in Los Angeles County on a regular basis. So it's great to be here. It was great to experience some of that geography of Los Angeles County, driving from Norwalk to Malibu today. So it's great to be here, and a little bit intimidating to follow that last panel and to be between you and Margarita. So I hope that we fulfill that. It's also great to be here with Neal and Kammy, who are 2 colleagues who I just have tremendous respect for and enjoy working with on a regular basis. So what I'd like to share with you a little bit, and this actually I think is a good follow-up to the last panel, is a brief overview of the work that we're doing in Los Angeles County to modernize the voting system in Los Angeles County. So this is not what voting will look like in 24 days in Los Angeles County. But it is what we think the future of voting might look like, and more importantly, to give you a little bit of an idea of how we've approached that issue. But to start out with just a little bit of context about Los Angeles County, we are the largest elections jurisdiction in the United States. We cover about 4,100 square miles. So as Monica said, very large geographic jurisdiction, very large population, 10.1 million estimated population. We've just this last week exceeded 5.1 million registered voters in Los Angeles County. And to put that into perspective, that means that we have more voters in this single county than 48 of the 50 states have statewide. So it's an interesting jurisdiction from a local administration standpoint. Los Angeles County is also one of the most diverse jurisdictions in the country in truly every sense of the word diversity, economically diverse, geographically diverse. A lot of people don't think about it, but Los Angeles County has a lot of rural areas as well as urban area, a lot of mobile population, ethnic diversity, language diversity, and again, economic diversity. So all of those are considerations as we look at how do we deliver a voting experience to this jurisdiction. Those are factors that we take into effect. In particularly language, under the Federal Voting Rights Act, we're required to provide all of our voting materials in 9 languages in addition to English. So as we look at the systems that deliver election services, we have to keep that in mind as well. So a little bit of background on our project. LA County recognized many years ago the need to replace our existing voting system. The voting system we use in Los Angeles County today is, from a voter perspective, if you're a voter going into a polling place, is essentially the same voting experience that you had when Los Angeles County first launched punch card voting in 1968. So while the system has changed behind the scenes, and certainly the administration of that system has changed since that time, the voting experience for the individual voter is very much the same. It's antiquated technology. It lacks flexibility and adaptability for the times. On the other hand, it's robust. It's a small form ballot that can be transported to our headquarters and counted centrally in a fairly efficient manner, and accurate, and a manner that can be audited and maintained. So that's why it has sustained over this period of time. But we also recognized that after the 2000 election in Florida, and then the passage of the Help America Vote Act and the infusion of federal funding, that it was time to modernize that system. Unfortunately, there has not been a voting system available on the market, on the commercial market, as limited as that market may be, that can meet the needs of LA County as a local voting jurisdiction. And we surpassed the time at which we could wait for the market to respond to that condition. And so we took on this project of really looking at, from a grassroots approach, if we were going to start from the beginning, how would we look at creating a voting system for a jurisdiction like Los Angeles County? And we did that with a few goals in mind. We wanted to design, we did not want to approach it as a technology project or as an equipment project. We really wanted to look at it from the perspective first of the voter. What is the voter experience that is desired in a voting system? If it's something that we're going to invest considerable public funds in, how can we make sure that it meets the needs of voters, not just the voters voting today, but anticipating the expectations of the voters of the future as well? And we're sort of unique in this respect in Los Angeles County. We wanted to have a publicly owned voting system. Because of our size, we have the infrastructure and the capacity to support a voting system internally, and we think that voting is among the most critical public processes that we oversee, and we think it should be owned by the public. We wanted to spur innovation in the voting system market so that actually through our work that maybe this limited market of commercial voting systems could actually become larger, recognizing that not all jurisdictions in the country or in the state have that capacity to support a system in-house. We want to encourage regulatory environment that allows for development, implementation, and adaptability. In that last panel, you heard a lot of talk about the regulatory environment and how any change to that requires a whole new certification that's costly and that requires redevelopment. We believe that's out of step with the way systems are developed today. We recognize that the fast pace of change and what may be required and meet the expectations of today needs to have the flexibility to adapt to the expectations and the behavior of our electorate tomorrow without having to scrap the entire system and start back at square one. And so in doing that, we want to establish LA County as a new model for voting systems development. And we also wanted to recognize that the investment that we're making in this project has the ability to influence the modernization of voting in other jurisdictions. So we wanted to be very transparent and share that data with other folks. So how did we do this? We partnered with a human-centered design firm, IDEO, out of the Bay Area, and we took this approach of going out and meeting people where they're at, voters, citizens, people who actively are engaged with the elections process, those who aren't actively engaged in the election process. And over the course of a considerable period of time, we have engaged over 3,500 individuals representing all aspects of our community in the design of this voting experience. Because of time, I'm not going to go into great detail about that, but that's been an extensive part of the project. We really paid attention to the voice of the voter, so we heard from people like the people you see on the screen behind me, veterans who have very, very strong opinions about what it's like to be in the polling place and what privacy feels like, not so much the compliance of privacy, but what the environment in which you're casting your vote contributes to the significance of that experience. Ernie, who's a retired postmaster who in his adult life lost his vision, was somebody who is actively engaged in the political process and a regular voter who found himself in a position where he could not vote a secret ballot because of his blindness. First generation American Sue, who became a new citizen but worries about the complexity of the ballot and how many things are on the ballot, something we're all aware of in this election where we have 17 statewide ballot measures in addition to all of the other contests on the measure. So we took that all of that into effect again, focusing on the voting experience and what would be feasible to introduce and begin to transition to in Los Angeles County. And this is the new voting experience, a vision of what we think is to come.
To meet the evolving needs of our nearly 5 million voters, Los Angeles County is challenging traditional ideas about voting systems. The days of inking your ballot are rapidly coming to an end. In the next few years, innovations and new technology will revolutionize the way you vote. Let's take a look at some of the changes you'll see. You know how voting includes paper sample ballots for your review? Get ready for a sample ballot that is interactive and accessible, providing a flexible and trustworthy voting method. This interactive ballot will let you mark it, generate a QR code for scanning and uploading, and review your selections at a vote center on a modern, sleek touchscreen with customizable viewing options for your preferred language, text size, and contrast. Voting will be simple, efficient, and cost-effective. Using input from the voting public and engaging expert designers, Los Angeles County's voting system has been reimagined to use a high-tech ballot marking device that still produces a paper ballot for accountability and accuracy. The best part? Voters will be able to vote anywhere in the county as early as 10 days prior to the election. Are you excited yet? By pioneering a voter-centered approach to design, Los Angeles County's new voting system will maximize technology to make it easier to cast your vote and enrich your voting experience for today and tomorrow.
So that's just a snapshot of the design that we have in place. There are 3 critical components to that design that I'm just going to touch on briefly because of time. The first is that this envisions voting happening in vote centers and in parallel with early voting options like vote by mail. We envision a move away from the single location for an individual voter on a random Tuesday between the hours of 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. And we're very excited that the California legislature and the governor recently signed Senate Bill 450 here in California that actually authorizes us to move in that direction. This just gives you a snapshot of what that might look like in Los Angeles County, as opposed to November 8th, where we'll have over 4,800 polling locations with 25,000 poll workers serving voters who have one place to go on election day. This would put us in a situation where we would have over 600 locations available on election day, many of those available the 10 days leading up to election day, and any voter could go to any one of those locations to cast their ballot in Los Angeles County, and every one of those voters could use any piece of equipment at that vote center to vote an accessible ballot. The key component here is the ballot marking device. As you saw in the video, this is primarily a touchscreen interface that the voter uses to make their selections. It's currently designed to create a paper ballot that is a selections-only ballot, so it doesn't print out the 3 pages of the things, all the people you didn't vote for. It prints out a summary of the votes that you did cast. It's human readable, can be audited and used in recount. Again, going back to the adaptability and flexibility principle of our project, this does not preclude that when and if the regulatory environment and the technology environment makes those things obsolete, if that happens, we could still use this interface for a paperless voting system if that comes to be. The other piece is the interactive sample ballot. Here in California, we're required by law to mail everybody an individual sample ballot prior to each election. This design envisions the ability for the voter to get that on a customizable basis and to use that on their own personal device to pre-mark their ballot and to bring it with them for an expedited voting experience where they could just scan that in much the way that we scan in boarding passes when we're traveling today, that's responsive to, again, the way people are functioning today in society. Finally, vote by mail. California is a significantly a vote by mail state. LA County, about 1/3 of our ballots in any given election are cast by mail. That's steadily increasing. I may have different opinions about whether or not that will continue to increase and the viability of the U.S. Postal Service, but we recognize that vote by mail is with us to stay for quite a while and is a preferred method for many of our voters. This re-envisions a vote by mail ballot format that is based on usability and voter experience that can be tabulated on the same equipment as the polling place devices. And I should have mentioned earlier that this is all intended to be developed on an open source data platform. Again, that's part of the public ownership environment. So I will end there and just encourage you to stay engaged with us. This is a very interactive process. We have a website that has all sorts of information. Most of the data that went into this design is available there. And as we proceed with this project, we invite continued input and interest.
Thank you so much, Dean. That's a wonderful example of how committed our local elections officials are to really putting the emphasis on voter service, and you can see how voter-centric Dean's process was in making sure that everything he was doing was starting with what the voter needs, what the voter wants. Kammy, would you like to go next?
Sure. You're going to pull up the slide? So good afternoon. As we started off, the voting experience in Inyo County is probably much different than most of the voters in LA County or Orange County. We are the second largest county geographically in California at over 10,000 square miles, yet we have under 10,000 voters in that space, so less than one voter per square mile, which means we're very dispersed. And because of that, we have to get really creative and innovative when we're thinking about how we can serve all of those voters with the corresponding small budget that we have. So to give you an example of what our office looks like, we have 2 full-time equivalent positions, one including myself, to serve all of these voters in this vast community. I think this is a longer version of the slide.
Clicker works too.
Yeah. So this is a much longer version. I think I sent you a truncated one, so we'll go through this a little bit quickly. So one of the ways that we have learned, or that I have learned, to be able to be innovative within the restraints that we have, which is that we don't have a lot of people and we don't have a lot of resources, is we have reached out and partnered with many nonprofits. And so I just wanted to tell you about one of those collaborative efforts. The very first panel that we started off with, they mentioned cash-strapped counties reaching out for private money grants, and I think they talked about this specific one, which is the Night News Challenge, and I'm one of those counties, and I did partner with some organizations. We partnered with 2 other voting jurisdictions, which was Cook County, Illinois, which is where Chicago's located, and Hillsborough County, Florida, which is where Tampa's located, and 2 nonprofits. You heard the Center for Technology and Civic Life mentioned earlier today. I would also highly recommend to check out what they're doing, and the Center for Civic Design. So we wanted to make sure that we were really encompassing the urban, suburban, rural, all across the United States, so that we can get an idea of all of the different types of needs that we might be looking at. And so we came together. We were one of over 1,000 applicants to put in for this, to answer this question, which I think a lot of people, a lot of nonprofits, a lot of you out there are also wanting to answer, and we've been trying to answer all day. How might we better inform voters and increase civic participation before, during, and after elections? So we put together our proposal and how we thought that might be accomplished, and we were funded. In order to boil down what we were going to do to be able to fund our project, which is basically build a civic engagement toolkit for local election officials, we met in December in Chicago. We brought voting officials from all across the United States to participate in a very structured process and how we could answer that specific question. Then we got together again in January in Tampa, and we did a user-based design on how exactly the website was going to look. So there's a lot of information out there already on how to basically, the toolkit idea is not new. It's of itself. But what we wanted to do was create sort of a space that we can share technology across jurisdictions, regardless of your technical acumen, regardless of cost or any kind of resource issues that you may have. And so in order to do that, we had to, again, further design exactly what this would look like. We looked at a lot of recipe websites and things like that to figure out what would be the best user approach. And I think you're going to hear this echoed throughout this panel, as election officials really are trying to do a user-based approach rather than us telling you what we think that you want. The next thing we did is we added content. So this is the unique also to the toolkit, is that every single tool that we put in there we actually went through and did step-by-step instructions on how to use it. Again, this speaks to the technical acumen component. So this is, there's a lot of great IT people that work within election space. In my office, since I have 2 people, I am the IT person. Tech is not my background. So it's extremely helpful to have these step-by-step instructions. And then we did user testing with election officials just to make sure that it was going to be responsive to what they were looking for. We launched in June of this year, and as of today, we've had election officials from all 50 states access and use the information. And so just really quickly, I wanted to go through some of those success stories. And before we get into the details of the success stories, these are the things that we were hearing in the workshops that we did in December, as well as workshops that were conducted the 6 months prior to putting the toolkit together. That these are the things that election officials were kind of considering and how we can better serve our voters. So one of the success stories of Arapahoe County, Colorado. It's a voter wait time measurement tool. You hear a lot about this across the United States, not so much in California. But as we move to new ways of voting, for instance with SB 450, these wait time measurement tools might become useful here in California as we reduce our polling places to vote centers and kind of figure out and respond to our voters. And what they did, this tool was actually used and designed in I can't remember exactly the election jurisdiction, I think it was Tennessee, and it was mainly built for an internal election administration tool so that the registrar can kind of know if there's wait times and be able to provide resources to those locations. But this county took the information from the toolkit and they actually adapted it to have an online resource so that voters could log in real time and see, okay, there's no wait time here, there was no wait time at all at this time, and be able to know that when they go down to their voting place, they're not going to be standing in line for an hour. Another one of our tools, you heard about text messaging earlier. I was really excited to hear that. This is something that I know myself in my election jurisdiction is something that I've been wanting to pursue. How can I communicate with voters this way? The current text messaging tool that's included in the toolkit, the example that I'm going to give you today, they used it specifically to communicate, the election administrator used it to communicate with their poll workers. When we talked about earlier that slide that texts are, I forget the percentage, but it was really high, that they're read versus email, I think it was only 20%. So this election jurisdiction was able to use text to talk to all of their poll workers throughout the day and get that real-time information out to them instead of having to try to track them down one by one, email them, or something else like that. And then finally, an example here in California, Shasta County. In this past election, they used civic icons and images. This is another tool that's in the toolkit. And basically, when they were revamping their sample balloting information, they were able to use this. So what's really cool about this, the library of civic icons, you can download them, use them, customize them, change their color, and it's really helpful in being able to explain to voters information in easy formats. So that's the toolkit, and right now we have 12 tools. It's always been envisioned that this is an evolving process, so I was excited to hear a lot of the things that are coming out in the earlier panels, and I'm getting business cards and hoping I'll follow up with some of you to see if some of those can be adapted, because really this is about a sharing network for administration all across jurisdictions to make sure that voting is made easier everywhere.
Thank you so much, Kammy. That's a wonderful example. There's a huge movement among election administrators to share best practices across offices. As Kammy pointed out, there are many, many differences across offices to how many resources they have in terms of people, but also in terms of time and in terms of budget. And sharing those best practices makes sure that something that maybe one office had time to develop can benefit a bunch of other offices without those other offices having to spend those resources again and again and again. And so thank you, Kammy, for sharing that. That's one of my favorite projects. And Neal is going to practice his IT manager skills over here and hook up his computer. We have a lot of things going on. Kammy, Can you talk a little bit about partnering with the Center for Tech and Civic Life and what that process looked like? Did they approach you, or was this an idea that somebody brought to them to enter that challenge?
So I was fortunate to work with both of those nonprofits previously. In 2012, we worked with the Center for Civic Design to redo all of our voting instructions in plain language. And then in 2014, I worked with the Center for Technology and Civic Life, who at the time was electricity. And we worked with them to build a new website that was also user-based. So I had already had formed a relationship. And one of the things about collaborating and networking, as you know, and as I'm sure everyone else here knows, is once you start those relationships, they can continue. And so we had been in conversations, well, how can we take what we've learned and be able to adapt it to a larger, broader audience? And the Night News Challenge grant happened to come up right during those conversations. And so it was perfect timing together with the perfect, well, I don't know if it was a perfect idea, but a good idea. Good enough to fund it anyway.
That's great. All right. We make jokes all the time that election administrators have to be IT managers now. That isn't normally what you think about unless you're in an IT position when you work in public service, but that is the nature of the beast because everything we do in elections is now done through technology. So that's a skill set everybody has to sort of learn.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the patience. I wanted to echo Dean's comments and what he said about working with Kammy, myself, same thing with Dean and Kammy. And Pete, it's great to see you again, and having engaged with you over the last few years has been fantastic. So thank you for what you've been doing and the conference as well. I have a couple things to say, and I'm certainly not, we're not like Los Angeles County, you know, where they have more voters in 48 of 50 states, but we have more voters in Orange County than these 18 states that you see on screen here. So in our small 952 square miles, we've packed in 1.5 million voters. And we have 3.2 million people that live in Orange County. So we have a lot of eligible voters still that have not registered, but we're still at the top of the state when it comes to that. Voter registration breakdowns, I always like to use this graphic because when I go to Sacramento and people meet me up there, they say, oh, you're from that conservative Orange County. Well, you know, it's not the case. I mean, if you look at our county data right now, it's a very diverse county. The Republicans have lost ground over the last few years. The Democrats have gained ground. And that has consistently been happening over the last few years. Largest growing percentage is made up in those no party preference voters. And that continues to grow. A little dip after the June primary, but that's still a pretty high number. Voter demographics, when you look at the data, currently more women turn out in Orange County than men, and women turn out at a higher rate than men, and there's more women registered in Orange County than men. I thought this was a unique piece of data because I figured, well, you know, men, for the most part, don't live as long as women, so perhaps that explains some of the data. But when you look at other counties in California, it's the reverse. So I would love to see a study on that to see why that might be the case, but women are doing a great job in Orange County. We are a diverse county. As Dean said, in Los Angeles County, they have 9 languages that they support. We now have 8 languages that we support in Orange County in addition to English. We have Vietnamese, Chinese, Spanish, and Korean on the federal side, and then we have 4 new languages on the state side as well. So we have a very diverse team at the registrar as well. And then just in terms of some data on vote-by-mail ballots, because we've been talking about that, when you put up the registration data and the turnout at polling places, in 2010, that's when we crossed the line in Orange County, in that we have more people casting ballots through the mail than turning out in the polling place. And you can see that trend has not abated at all since 2010. In fact, it continues to grow. Just mailed out shy of 900,000 vote-by-mail ballots to Orange County voters. Go back 6 years, and we mailed out about 400,000. So the growth has been dramatic, and that's not really through our strong promotion of vote by mail. The electorate is looking for convenience and different ways to vote. We know this, and you can see it in the data. I was going to play you a nice video, but I don't think that I've got sound here. That's okay. So we're going to skip this. So what I wanted to do was to break down what I wanted to talk about in terms of technology into 4 categories. And in the middle, obviously, are the voter components, because this conference is focusing on that. But on the left, on the bookends, candidates and volunteers are a big part of what we do. And in fact, those individuals, as you know, are obviously voters. And they can utilize this technology as well. So I wanted to go through those 4 areas and talk to you about how we're using technology to engage with these groups across the screen here. So the first is candidates. And I wanted to pose the question to you that we asked internally, because technology just shouldn't be used for bells and whistles. It should be used to solve problems. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. But how could we improve the efficiencies and ease the pressure during peak demand on candidate filing? If you've ever run for office in California, you know that the paperwork is immense. It can take hours for you to do this on multiple days. And we were looking for ways to improve that process and make it easier on candidates. So we developed an online candidate filing system. We are the first in California, I think the only in California, that has a full online candidate filing system. So a candidate can do everything online up to the last piece, which is the declaration of candidacy. I'm going to work on a change in the law so that we don't have to have a wet signature on that. But right now, everything can be done at home until that last piece, including paying your filing fee. You can use that online and do that. All of the documents are generated for you, and it's kind of like if you've checked in for a cruise ship before. It's very similar to that in the steps that there's a checklist for you. You see when you've completed certain items in the process of filing. You can do your candidate statement online. Anything that you would normally do in our office, you can do online. And this actually has been utilized quite a bit. In 2016, in the June primary, we had almost 140 candidates utilize online candidate filing, which was terrific, out of 400 candidates. So it's continuing to grow in popularity. Election data, we looked at 10 years worth of Public Records Act requests. And we started kind of going through that data and figuring out what are the largest groups of areas where people are requesting information or data, because that was really bogging down the department in responding to those requests. Plus, how can we be more transparent with the election data? And so we utilized that kind of approach to this as we started developing some of these other tools. So for instance, a voter lookup tool. You know, a lot of counties utilize those throughout the state. We wanted to go a step further and to take all of the public data for a voter, if they could access it using their private information, what could we provide them? So everything from your name, your address, your polling place, your sample ballot, like most of the counties do, we do that. But you can also access language information. You can opt out of your sample ballot if you want to. You can get it delivered to you by text now, or you can have it delivered to you via email, which is growing in popularity. You can look up your elected officials, and you have your complete voter history all the way back until the 1990s on your personal voter lookup page. It's optimized for mobile use, and when we look at the analytics, this is one of the highest visited sites on our site, web pages, for voters to look up this information. And I think the most popular thing that we have on our site is our Data Central section. Campaigns use this religiously. We have the media that uses this. And what we've done is we've taken about 50 data points. That is all of the data that we have currently in the office with respect to ballots, voter registration, petitions, et cetera, and put that into what looks like an interface for buying stocks, perhaps. It's real user-friendly, and the data is presented, as you can see, broken down by category, and it's in real time. So as voters register to vote, people can go into this and see trend lines. They can look in their community specifically and see how many individuals registered for a particular party. Let me just pull through these tabs. So you can look at poll worker recruitment by the hour. You can look at ADA accommodations by polling places. All of the data that's in the election management system that was typically behind the scenes for election officials to look at, we're putting it on a public interface. So people can go in and look at this information. The campaigns love it because they can go in and see, for instance, when we're on the ballot page here, the ballots that have been mailed, they can check by community, how many ballots were mailed in each individual party, how many were returned in each individual party by the community. So it's not just the campaigns, but we have voters that utilize these tools as well. We built our own mapping system. There are, I think, a couple of good mapping systems out there for election officials to use, but we wanted to go a step further. And so this is homegrown internally. You can put all the layers on here that you could imagine. Name the district. You can do this from city all the way down to water districts and all the way up to congressional districts. But you can also change the views. I think the most important tool here are the turnout tools and the results tools. So in the results tools, you can drill down and get information on turnout, color-coded, and however you want it. You can set up that interface yourself, and then you can see where people are voting for you as a candidate, where voters are turning out. On the turnout side, you can see the heavy turnout in the county versus the light turnout. You can do that by individual contests. It doesn't have to be a countywide election. So you can drill down into any of the contests that are on the ballot and do this. Optimized for mobile platforms as well. One of our most popular tools for city clerks is the petition section. This may seem like dry data for you, perhaps, but the city clerks love it because they can go in here and they can select a type of petition, and it will calculate for them how many registered voters need to sign the petition, what % in their community. All those tools are available for them. And then you can track the status of any petition, whether it's state petition, local petition, and the status in the office, and when it's due and the status of where we're at. When it comes to communication, we have some very robust Stay Connected pages that include about 250 videos, press information, podcasts, anything you would want on elections is in here, I think. We have news blasts that we do on a daily basis, and then you also have some press tools here that I just want to go through real quick and show you. Twitter, I think, you know, this is, everybody's using Twitter now, but we're trying to use it in different ways to communicate with the voters. I think one of the arguments, and one of your employees made this, Dean, I thought was really good, is that Twitter seems to put people in the front of the line now, right? As people tweet out something to an election official, suddenly you're on it in a different way, perhaps, than you would be if they were trying to call your office. And we're trying to make that balance between putting people in the front of the line versus not. But on the Facebook side, we're putting apps embedded in the Facebook tool so that you can, within the app itself, chat directly with somebody. You don't have to leave Facebook to do it. You can register to vote. You have voter assistance tools right inside of Facebook. Newsletters, we're doing all of the communication pieces, and I'll kind of run through this pretty quickly. The media resources, so media outlets from national news organizations down to regional news organizations have stock photos, B-roll footage that they can use, anything related to election data, and of course live streaming. And then the last piece of this are the volunteers. So we wanted to create a tool for volunteers to be able, when they volunteer, to not have to come down to our office to get materials or for us to have to mail them materials. So we developed something called the Poll Worker Pass. When you sign up to volunteer in Orange County, you get a card that's sent to you. It's got a barcode on it. We scan you along the way like a FedEx box. So anything that you do, whether it's training, picking up supplies, showing up at the polling place, getting your payroll, you can monitor that, and we can monitor that data throughout the entire process. It's like online banking. Once you've set up your account and you go in here, you can see your training, your polling place, the clerks that are assigned to you with the board, on your board. If you have ADA requirements in your polling place, that's identified in the Poll Worker Pass account as well as online training tools, in-class training information. Everything's included in one location for the poll workers. And they love it. They don't have to call our office and interface with us. They can do it all online. The last piece of this is when they get paid, their stipend. May seem mundane, but we get more calls on when am I going to get my check after the election than volunteering sometimes. But they can track when their check is issued. when it's in the mail, and if they're a student poll worker, they can print out a certificate of completion for their graduation that they can use at the high school. So lots of different tools is the bottom line. I gave you 4 categories. We're doing lots of unique things, I think, throughout the department. I don't know if you're going to ask Monica about what's next for us, or can I just take a few seconds to say that?
Why don't you take a few seconds?
All right, thank you. 3 big things for us on the horizon. Replacing our voting system like Los Angeles County is going to be doing. This will be the last election we'll be utilizing our system in Orange County. Big project ahead for replacing the system by June of 18. So there's a lot of steps that have to take place between now and then, obviously. We are going to be replacing our entire mailing operations system. So there is about $5 million worth of equipment in there that we're going to be mothballing and then going out to RFP for new equipment. And then finally, we're doing all of the printing in Orange County. Our board and CEO said, well, you're needing ballots printed. Why don't you go ahead and do the printing for the entire county? So on top of printing ballots, we're printing business cards and everything else. That's a whole nother story. But we're going to be replacing our system for printing. And I just want to touch real quickly on that because sample ballots, as we know, and we have to print those for voters, we're going to be using new technology to have variable data that we can put inside of the sample ballot. So particularly, like your Citibank bill, for example, when it comes, it's customized for you, we're going to be doing that with sample ballots. So voters may have information inside that sample ballot customized just for them, each individual voter out of 1.5 million. So that's next for us, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Neal. I'm going to move really quickly into questions because I know we want to get to audience questions. We talked a little bit about this on the last panel, but I want to give you a chance to answer it. You know, what are the challenges in your office that you're really trying to face with technology and to use to mitigate with technology? Because it's, you know, you're using public tax dollars and it can't just be technology for technology's sake. It's technology for a purpose. So what are those challenges you're trying to address, and what are the obstacles that you're facing in upgrading election systems to 2.0 systems?
Well, I guess I'll jump in on that. I mean, I think the challenges, I think you stated the question really well. I think from our perspective in Los Angeles, it's really starting to look at technology as the tool. So the problem is not technology, and the solution is not solely technology. It's using technology to address problems and to be part of a comprehensive solution. And I think what we're learning about usability and voter behavior or citizen behavior is that what works for one group of constituents doesn't work for all groups of constituents. So we have to have platforms and services that are adaptable and customizable. So a lot of what Neal was just talking about, I think, is exactly what the expectation is moving forward. And doing that in an environment that that has not kept up with the rapid pace of change in technology, I think is the biggest challenge, is getting past the regulatory hurdles that keep public sector from moving at the same pace as everything else. And I think we're making progress in that area, but I think that's the biggest challenge. And of course, the other challenge is we're constantly running elections. So it would be great to have some time to implement these systems, but in the meantime, we have to continue delivering the elections that are on board now. And the final piece in LA County, and I think this is true in all jurisdictions, but perhaps exaggerated, is that we have a very large digital divide. I mean, we need to provide services to people who don't have ready access to technology or these tools, and we also have to respond to the expectations of people in our community who are developing these tools and have expectations in that regard as well.
I would just add, you know, the biggest challenge for us in Orange County, and I think what Dean is doing in LA is terrific in terms of developing their own system. We're not headed down that path, and somebody spoke about this earlier. There are only 4 really major players in the traditional market in voting systems currently, and of those 4, very few have anything that's certified for use in California. So the biggest challenge for us as a county that has end-of-life system, this is the last election I can use that. What's on the horizon? What's next for us in 18? So, and 18 is going to come very quickly. I mean, that is just a huge challenge for us to try and overcome.
And I would say the obvious answer that I would give is we have this challenge that It's easier to get in a plane and go to Hawaii. You will get there quicker than you will to drive from one end of my county to the other. And so we have this huge resource problem. So we use technology to be able to get information out to our voters. But in terms of digital divide, it's definitely a valid and needed conversation to have. I was actually surprised we didn't talk about that in any of the earlier panels. I hadn't heard that terminology, so I'm glad you brought it up. There's also a digital divide in terms of jurisdictions. So you have smaller jurisdictions that don't have access to the resources that other jurisdictions have. And so we're looking to counties like LA County, who are developing their voting system, so that when we get to that point, perhaps we can use some of the, and benefit from some of the things that they've already gone through and the research that they've done to be able to upgrade our systems. And one of the things that, that I'm able to do in our jurisdiction, being an elected official, is it's the advocacy component. So part of this is getting information out to people that's accurate information and advocating for those regulatory changes that are needed so that we can adapt to these new systems and new ways of communicating to our voters.
That's a perfect segue into my next question, because all of you have talked about collaboration with different groups, whether that's nonprofits, whether that's community organizations. So I'd love it if you just address how you collaborate when you're talking about developing new voter services or improving the ones you have. Who do you collaborate with? Who do you reach out to? And how has that impacted your work? Have you found things that have surprised you as you've gone out and actually tested with voters and gotten on the ground of collaborating with the publics that you serve?
So I think that collaboration is the key to all of this. I think that none of this can be done in a vacuum, and I think that's what we've learned is taking that human-centered or voter-centered approach. We're fortunate in LA County in that we have a rich group of stakeholders that are very engaged in the work that we do, that represent the diversity of the county, and we've engaged them. So we have an active advisory committee from the stakeholder community. We've also engaged a very well-regarded technical advisory committee from community beyond the borders of LA County to advise us on the technical aspects. I think the interesting part of your question from my perspective, just to share a couple anecdotes, would be what has surprised us in that. And one of the things that as we've gone through this design process, when we took early versions of the prototypes out and we did user testing, I think the most profound realization for me was recognizing the difference between designing for compliance versus designing for usability. And in terms of that it's easy to figure out when you're talking about the accessibility of voting systems whether a system is measures to the height of the table or the span that a wheelchair can wheel up to it. That's very different than what a person who functions on a day-to-day basis in a wheelchair will tell you about the usability of that system. And I think that where we've kind of gone sideways in the industry is that we've been designing for compliance. We've been designing for compliance with regulatory environment, with the minimum requirements of things about accessibility and language access. And the reality is that the tools that are out there today aren't being used because they weren't designed with the end user in mind. So we've learned some real important insights from people about accessibility. Also simple things like what does privacy mean to somebody? We discovered in user testing that simply how you position the ballot marking devices in a room affects how people feel about privacy. We had a design element that would be a relatively costly, but we thought in early stages important feature of a screen shield to make sure if somebody is in the near vicinity of your ballot marking device that they couldn't see what was on the screen. What we discovered in user testing is that even if you had that in place, the perception that somebody had visual access to your ballot still didn't give them the sense of privacy. But if you turn the machines around so that the voter's facing into the room or out to the sides of the room instead of putting the devices along the perimeter of the room, it fundamentally changed how they felt about the system, which was a change that cost no money but was an important insight. So I think that's what you get from collaboration.
I don't know what to say now. I mean, you said it all. That was great. I would add a couple things that we are collaborating with community groups and advocacy groups throughout Orange County on what's next for us and on the horizon. But I think even with our extensive outreach that we're doing, you know, we're a large county, 3.2 million people and 1.5 million voters. We're not reaching, you know, all four corners of the county when you're looking at what we're trying to gather in terms of data, although we've done some extensive research. The voting system analysis that we've done on our current system, we took about 18 months to do that, down to the part components, so we know the failure rate and what's going to be happening, certainly going into November, and what we're paying attention to, and what we want to take out of that as lessons learned. I do want to share one anecdotal story of a surprise that we learned in our testing with voters over the last 18 months. Big shift from 2003 until now. Back in 2003, there was tremendous fear of touchscreens. And as we fast forward to 2016, that's the first thing they're looking for is a touch screen. How does it mirror what I use in my daily activities on my phone or whatever my device is? And that's what they're looking for. So it goes down to usability, and how they interact with the device is a lot of the things that we've learned over the last 18 months.
I think I touched on this earlier when Neal was getting set up, but I would say that I am always open to collaborate, especially because we do have the resource issue. So if anyone out there is looking to pilot a project, this is my call out. One of the things that we have been able to successfully do with pilots, because Inyo County has the voting population that it does, because we have amazing broadband that we do, that we are a good county for piloting different kinds of technologies. It's safe to do it. We have the capability. And I think what I've learned in being able to reach out and look at new technologies is that I learned how much that I need to know and how much more I need to learn. I came to this office from a background in real estate, so I was always a poll worker before I came, but I didn't have a background in election administration. It's not something you go to college for. I think that they actually are starting now to have classes for that, but that's a relatively new thing. And so I don't have a background in IT. I don't have a background in designing perfect sample ballot booklets. And so I think one of the things that election officials can really benefit from is being open-minded and hearing these nonprofits and working with nonprofits so that we can continue to improve the information that we're providing to voters and the experience that we're providing to voters. And we have to do that by actually listening and being open to hearing those outside of our networks that might be a little adversarial, perhaps, it may feel, but just knowing that we're in this together. We're trying to provide the best voting experience as possible. And so I think working collaboratively is the best way to do that.
And having piloted a tool with Kammy, I can tell you that Inyo County is great to pilot with. Do we have audience questions?